Alone in a new country. Imagine waking up in a place where everything technically works. The buses run on time, the streets are clean. The sky looks wide and confident, yet something inside you feels unfinished, like a sentence that never reaches a period. That was me, standing in the United States, holding a cup of coffee that tasted fine, living a life that looked fine, and wondering quietly why I still felt so alone. If you have ever studied English for years but still felt invisible when you spoke, this story might sound uncomfortably familiar. When I first came to the U.S., I believed loneliness would be temporary. I told myself it was just jet lag mixed with culture shock, the emotional version of your phone not connecting to Wi-Fi right away. Give it time, I thought. Everything connects eventually. America is efficient like that. But time passed, and while my schedule filled up with work, errands, and polite conversations, my sense of belonging stayed buffering. The climate was the first surprise. Not just hot or cold, but dramatic. Summers that felt aggressive, winters that felt personal. Back home, weather was background noise. In America, it was a personality. People talked about it at work, planned their lives around it, warned you about it with a seriousness usually reserved for family advice. I didn't know it yet, but this constant awareness of environment would mirror how aware I became of myself, my accent, my pauses, my mistakes. At work, I functioned. That's the best word. I showed up on time, completed tasks, smiled at the right moments. My English was usable. Grammatically fine. Emotionally limited. I could explain what I did, but not who I was. There's a difference. A big one. Science actually explains this. When you operate in a second language, your brain prioritizes accuracy over emotion. You sound correct, but you feel distant even from yourself. No one tells you that part when they sell you the dream of speaking fluent English. I remember lunch breaks being the hardest. Meetings had structure. Lunch had freedom. People joked, shared stories, complained about their kids or their weekend plans. I laughed a second too late, nodded too often, used safe phrases like "that's interesting" or "yeah, totally." Inside, my brain was running subtitles at full speed. By the time I found the right words, the moment had moved on. Socially, I was always slightly behind, like someone trying to jump onto a moving train. At night, I practiced English the way many people do: videos, podcasts, slow stories. Real English story practice, B1 to C2, the whole journey. But something was missing. I wasn't just learning a language. I was trying to learn how to exist in another human system. Language carries culture, humor, silence, timing. You don't just translate words. You translate yourself. And that process is exhausting in ways grammar books never mention. There's a psychological concept called social fatigue, common among immigrants. Your brain works overtime interpreting cues native speakers process automatically. After a full day, you're not tired because you worked hard. You're tired because you paid attention hard. I didn't know the term back then. I just knew I came home drained, even though nothing dramatic had happened. I called my family often. Different time zones, familiar voices. Those calls helped, but they also reminded me of what I didn't have physically. In the U.S., independence is celebrated. You handle things yourself. You move out early. You figure it out. That's empowering and isolating. Back home, family was default. In America, family was something you scheduled. And yet, here's the quiet truth no one told me. Loneliness doesn't mean you failed. It means you're between chapters. Neuroscience shows that humans are wired to belong. When your environment changes faster than your emotional connections, your brain sends discomfort as a signal, not to quit, but to search. I thought something was wrong with me. In reality, something was preparing me. One evening, after a long day, I sat in my car longer than usual. Not because I loved the view, it was a parking lot, but because the silence felt easier than going inside an empty apartment. I laughed at myself. I had crossed an ocean, survived paperwork, jobs, weather, and here I was emotionally defeated by a parking lot. That small moment of humor saved me. It reminded me I was still human, still capable of observing my own drama from the outside. This is where the idea of family without blood quietly enters, without announcements or dramatic music. At this stage of my life, I hadn't found them yet. But the absence was doing important work. It was lowering my expectations, softening my judgments, teaching me to listen, slowly, imperfectly, honestly. Exactly the way you learn a language well. If you're listening to this to practice English, don't rush this part. Sit with the silence of the story. Notice the pauses. Repeat simple sentences if you need to. I felt alone. I didn't belong yet. These are easy sentences, but heavy truths. Language sticks better when emotion is involved. That's not motivation talk, that's neuroscience. Looking back, this first chapter wasn't about suffering. It was about space. Space where new connections could eventually grow. Space where I learned that belonging isn't automatic, even in a country full of people. It's built slowly, by showing up, by staying open, by allowing strangers to become something more, later. And maybe that's the gentle question I want to leave you with for now. What if feeling alone doesn't mean you have no family, but that you haven't met them yet? America was not a dream. People love to ask, so, is America like the movies? They ask it with the same tone you use when checking if dessert is actually sugar-free. I usually smile and say, yes. And no. The truth takes longer. America was not a dream for me. It was a system. A very well-organized system that works, even when you don't feel like you do. At first, everything looked impressive. Big roads. Big stores. Big cups of coffee that seemed designed to keep you awake long enough to question your life choices. The dream was visible everywhere, printed on billboards and spoken in confident voices. Work hard. Be independent. You'll make it. But no one explains what happens emotionally when you arrive ready to work hard, yet don't know where to put your heart. I remember my first few months clearly. I was busy all the time, yet strangely unfulfilled. My calendar was full, but my life felt empty in quiet moments. Psychologists call this achievement without attachment. You're doing things, accomplishing things, but not bonding with people while doing them. Your brain gets results, but your nervous system stays unsettled. I didn't have those words then. I just knew something felt off. The climate didn't help. In 1 year, I experienced heat that felt like punishment and cold that felt personal. Americans don't just live with weather, they negotiate with it. Snow days, heat warnings, weather apps that send alerts like emotional check-ins. I started to realize that survival here wasn't just about language or work. It was about adaptation. Fast adaptation. At work, people were polite. Very polite. "How are you?" was asked often, but rarely answered honestly. I learned quickly that the correct response was "Good, thanks. You?" Even if your soul was doing push-ups just to stay upright. This cultural efficiency is fascinating. It keeps things smooth, but it also creates distance. Back home, concern came with depth. Here, concern came with boundaries. My English improved, technically. I could explain projects, understand instructions, and even joke a little, carefully. But humor is cultural. Timing matters. References matter. I once made a joke that landed so quietly it felt like it needed an apology. Everyone smiled politely, which in America can mean many things, including "We did not get that, but we respect your effort." I respected their respect. Still felt alone. There's a concept in sociology called functional belonging. You belong because you serve a function. Coworker. Neighbor. Customer. But emotional belonging, that's different. That requires shared vulnerability. Shared pauses. Shared silence. And silence, in a second language, is scary. You worry it sounds stupid. You worry it sounds empty. So you fill it with safe words, even when what you really want is connection. Some nights, I questioned my decision to come. Not dramatically. Quietly. That's how doubt works when you're an adult. It doesn't scream. It whispers while you're doing the dishes. It asks, "Was this worth it?" While you fold laundry in a country that still doesn't feel like yours. I kept practicing English, though. Slowly. Patiently. Real English stories, simple sentences, repetition. I noticed something interesting. When the stories were about feelings, loss, hope, confusion, I remembered the words better. Science backs this up. Emotional content activates deeper memory networks. Your brain doesn't just store the word. It stores the experience. That's why learning English through story works, especially when the story feels uncomfortably close. I started to see America differently. Not as a dream I failed to enter, but as a place that doesn't promise emotional safety. It offers opportunity, not comfort. That's not a flaw. It's a design choice. Once I stopped expecting it to feel like home automatically, the disappointment softened. Expectations are heavy luggage. Letting go makes the journey lighter. There was humor in this realization. I had expected a country to give me a feeling. That's like expecting a gym membership to give you muscles. You still have to show up. Repeatedly. Awkwardly. And sometimes alone. But showing up matters. Neurologically, repetition builds familiarity. Familiarity reduces threat. Slowly, your brain stops asking, "Do I belong here?" and starts asking, "Who might I belong with?" This was the turning point, even though nothing dramatic happened. No big success. No sudden friendship. Just a shift in perspective. I stopped chasing the American dream and started observing American reality, people trying, failing, adapting, just like me. Under different accents, we shared the same fatigue. If you're listening to this to practice English, notice how simple the sentences are. I was busy, but lonely. America worked, but I didn't feel at home. These are B1 sentences carrying C2 emotions. Say them out loud. Slowly. Let them sound human, not perfect. That's how language becomes yours. At this stage of my journey, I still didn't have a chosen family. But I had stopped blaming myself for not having one yet. And that matters. Because belonging doesn't grow in self-criticism. It grows in patience. In openness. In the quiet decision to stay a little longer and see what, or who, might appear. America was not a dream. It was a beginning. And beginnings are rarely comfortable. Working, but not belonging. Have you ever been busy all day and still feel like nothing really happened? Not because you did nothing, but because nothing touched you. That was my life for a long time in America. I worked. I earned money. I paid bills. On paper, everything looked stable. Emotionally, it felt like living inside a well-organized waiting room, clean, quiet, and somehow endless. My job gave me structure. Americans are excellent at structure. Clear schedules. Clear roles. Clear expectations. I appreciated that. Coming from a place where things were more flexible, this clarity felt reassuring. You knew what to do, when to do it, and how success was measured. The problem was, no one measured how you felt while doing it. At work, I was known as reliable. That word followed me everywhere. Reliable worker. Reliable teammate. Reliable presence. It sounds positive, and it is, but it's also safe. Too safe. Reliable people don't get asked deep questions. They don't get checked on emotionally. They're assumed to be fine. I smiled when people said it, but inside I wondered when someone would describe me as connected instead. My English was improving, technically speaking. I could participate in meetings, understand jokes, sometimes after a short delay, and even share small opinions. But I noticed something strange. The more professional my English became, the more distant I felt. Professional language creates a shield. It protects you from mistakes, but it also protects others from knowing you. My sentences were correct, but careful. Nothing risky lived inside them. There's a psychological term for this: emotional masking. You adjust your behavior to fit expectations, especially in unfamiliar environments. Immigrants do this instinctively. You hide confusion. You soften opinions. You laugh politely. Over time, your nervous system stays on alert, even when nothing is wrong. That constant alertness is exhausting. You don't feel unsafe, just unsettled. Lunch breaks were still the hardest. People gathered in groups, discussing shows, sports, childhood memories I didn't share. I listened. Listening was my strength. But listening without being invited in slowly convinces you that you don't belong there. Not because people are unkind, but because familiarity hasn't formed yet. Belonging needs repetition. It needs shared experiences. Not just shared space. Sometimes, coworkers talked about family. Weekend visits. Parents nearby. Childhood homes a few hours away. I nodded, contributed small comments. That sounds nice. You're lucky. Those sentences are easy English. But behind them lived a heavier thought: I was building a life without the people who built me. That realization hits differently when you're tired. I tried to fix the feeling the logical way. Work harder. Improve faster. Be more social. I signed up for activities, forced small talk, attended gatherings even when my energy was low. That's when I learned an important lesson: belonging cannot be forced. Neuroscience shows that social bonding happens when your brain feels safe enough to be authentic. Forced connection keeps the brain in performance mode. You show up, but you don't arrive. There was humor in my attempts, though. I remember one office event where I tried to join a casual conversation and accidentally answered a rhetorical question seriously. Everyone laughed, kindly. I laughed too, a bit later. Moments like that used to embarrass me. Slowly, I started to see them as proof that I was present, trying, human. Perfect English wouldn't have saved me there. Only patience did. At home, I reflected a lot. Quiet apartments are excellent teachers. They reflect your thoughts back to you, whether you like it or not. I realized I wasn't just missing people. I was missing mirrors, people who see you and say, yes, that makes sense. Without that, even success feels hollow. This was when my English practice changed. I stopped focusing only on vocabulary and pronunciation. I started paying attention to tone, pauses, simple emotional sentences. I feel tired today. Work was heavy. I miss home sometimes. These are B1 sentences, but they open C2 level conversations. Science supports this approach. Emotional labeling reduces stress and increases connection. Saying how you feel, even simply, helps your brain regulate itself. At work, I slowly allowed small truths to appear. Not dramatic confessions. Just honesty. When asked how are you, I occasionally answered, a bit tired, but okay. Something interesting happened. Some people paused. Really paused. A few responded with their own honesty. That's how micro-connections begin. Not with impressive stories, but with shared reality. I still didn't feel like I belonged fully. But the distance had changed. It was no longer a wall. It was a gap, something that could be crossed. I stopped expecting my workplace to feel like family. That expectation was unfair to everyone. Instead, I let it be what it was, a place of cooperation. Family, I began to suspect, might appear somewhere else. Unexpectedly. If you're using this story to practice English, try this: read one paragraph aloud and notice where your voice slows down. That's where emotion lives. Language isn't about speed. It's about resonance. Let the words sit. Let them sound imperfect. That's how they become real. Working without belonging taught me something essential. Before you can recognize chosen family, you must first understand what's missing. Absence sharpens awareness. It prepares you to notice the people who don't just work beside you, but stay. And trust me, those people rarely announce themselves. English and emotional silence. Have you ever known exactly what you wanted to say, but felt your mouth freeze right before the words came out? Not because you forgot the vocabulary, but because you weren't sure the words would carry the weight of what you felt. That was my relationship with English for a long time. Technically close. Emotionally distant. In America, silence is polite. Efficient. Acceptable. But emotional silence is something else. Emotional silence happens when you speak, yet hide. When your sentences do their job, but your feelings stay unemployed. My English worked perfectly for tasks. It failed quietly at connection. I could explain my work process in detail. I could understand instructions, deadlines, expectations. But when someone asked a personal question, "How was your weekend?" or "Are you okay?" my brain switched into defense mode. I reached for safe answers. Good. Busy. Nothing special. Those phrases are the emergency exits of conversation. Easy to use. No risk. No depth. There's a neurological reason for this. When using a second language, especially in emotionally unfamiliar environments, the brain prioritizes survival over expression. You choose clarity over honesty. Safety over vulnerability. That's not weakness. That's biology. Your nervous system doesn't trust the environment yet, so it keeps your emotions on a short leash. I didn't know that back then. I just thought I was bad at English. Or worse, bad at being human in English. Sometimes, the silence felt louder than words. During conversations, there were moments when everyone laughed, and I laughed too, half a second late. That delay may seem small, but emotionally it's huge. It tells you you're always catching up, never arriving. Humor requires timing. Timing requires confidence. Confidence requires safety. I had grammar, but not safety. I remember one specific moment. A coworker shared a personal story about a difficult family situation. The room softened. People listened differently. I wanted to say something supportive. I felt it clearly. The sentence formed in my head, slowly. But by the time I was ready, the conversation had moved on. I smiled, nodded, stayed quiet. That night, I replayed the moment in my head, translating what I could have said. Not for language practice, but for emotional relief. Psychologists call this delayed emotional processing. You experience the feeling, but express it later, often alone. Immigrants experience this often. Your inner world becomes rich, but hidden. Over time, that hidden weight turns into loneliness, even when you're surrounded by people. There was something almost funny about it. I could discuss complex topics in English, policies, procedures, systems, but struggled to say simple truths like I miss home or I feel overwhelmed today. Those sentences are short, grammatically easy, emotionally risky. They expose you. And exposure, in a new language, feels dangerous. That's when I changed how I practiced English. Instead of chasing advanced vocabulary, I practiced emotional sentences. Basic ones. Honest ones. I feel tired. Today was hard. I don't know how to say this yet. Saying them out loud, alone at first. Slowly. Repeatedly. It felt silly, like learning to walk after running, but it worked. Research shows that naming emotions reduces stress and increases emotional regulation. Even in a second language. Especially in a second language. I started small in real life too. When someone asked, "How are you?" I occasionally answered, "A bit tired today." Not dramatic. Just real. Something unexpected happened. Some people nodded and moved on. That was fine. But a few paused. Asked a follow-up question. Shared something small of their own. That's how emotional silence cracks, not with speeches, but with permission. English didn't suddenly become beautiful. It became usable. For feelings. For pauses. For shared humanity. I learned that you don't need perfect sentences to create connection. You need sincerity and timing. Sometimes even imperfect words carry more truth than perfect ones spoken too safely. Humor helped too. I learned to laugh at my own awkwardness. Once, trying to express stress, I accidentally said I felt compressed instead of stressed. People laughed. I laughed. The moment relaxed. And somehow, that mistake said more than the correct word would have. It made me human, not foreign. Slowly, emotional silence stopped feeling like protection and started feeling like distance. That awareness mattered. You can't change what you don't notice. I began to understand that language learning isn't just about input and output. It's about trust. Trust that your feelings deserve space, even in imperfect English. If you're listening to this for real English story practice, try repeating these sentences out loud. I don't have the right words yet. But this feeling is real. They're simple. B1 level. But they open doors that C2 grammar never could. Your accent doesn't cancel your emotions. Your pauses don't reduce your value. At this point in my journey, I still hadn't found my chosen family. But something important was happening inside me. I was becoming emotionally audible. I was learning to let others hear me, even quietly. That's the first step toward being chosen, and choosing others, without blood. Because family doesn't start with perfection. It starts with someone hearing you, in a language you're still learning, and staying anyway. The first person who stayed. Not every important person arrives loudly. Some just don't leave. At first, you don't notice them because you're busy surviving. Paying bills. Improving English. Pretending you're fine. Then one day, you realize someone has been standing nearby for a while, quietly consistent, like a lamp you forgot to turn off. That was how the first person who stayed entered my life in America. It wasn't dramatic. No movie-style introduction. We met through something ordinary: work, routine, shared space. The kind of situation where you exchange polite sentences and move on. At least, that's what usually happens. But this time, something subtle felt different. Not exciting. Not romantic. Just steady. In the beginning, our conversations were simple. Safe English. Predictable topics. Weather. Work. Daily inconveniences. I noticed I didn't feel rushed when speaking with them. My sentences came out slowly, sometimes imperfectly, and no one tried to finish them for me. That alone felt rare. There's a concept in psychology called felt safety. It's not about being protected from danger. It's about feeling allowed to exist as you are. No performance required. Your nervous system relaxes. Your voice lowers. Your breathing slows. I didn't have the term then, but my body recognized it immediately. They remembered small things about me. Not important facts, just human details. What food I missed. How winter affected my mood. That I needed extra time to explain myself. When someone remembers your pauses, not just your words, that's different. That's attention. At first, I didn't trust it. Immigrants learn caution quickly. You assume kindness has an expiration date. You prepare for distance before it happens. So I stayed polite. Grateful. Slightly guarded. When they asked, "How are you, really?" I still answered carefully. But they stayed. They stayed when my English failed mid-sentence. They stayed when I repeated myself. They stayed when I was quiet. They didn't fill the silence to save me. They let it exist. That's an underrated skill. Silence, when shared, becomes a language. There was humor too. Gentle humor. Once, I struggled to explain a feeling and used 3 sentences when one would have done. They listened, nodded, and said, smiling, "I think I understand." The relief I felt was disproportionate to the moment. My brain had been holding its breath. It finally exhaled. Neuroscience tells us that trust builds through consistency, not intensity. Big gestures impress us. Small reliable behaviors convince us. This person didn't try to fix me, motivate me, or teach me English. They simply showed up the same way every time. That predictability felt like emotional shelter. One day, without planning it, I shared something personal. Not my whole story. Just a piece. A truth I usually kept for phone calls home. I said it slowly, choosing simple words. B1 level English. High level emotion. I waited for the awkwardness. It didn't come. Instead, they responded with their own story. Different background. Similar feeling. That's when something clicked. Connection doesn't require matching histories. It requires overlapping emotions. Loneliness recognizes loneliness. Confusion understands confusion. I went home that day lighter, confused by the feeling. Nothing had changed externally. Same apartment. Same job. Same life. But internally, something had shifted. I replayed the conversation, not to correct my English, but to relive the comfort. That's how you know something matters. I still didn't call this person family. That word felt too heavy, too early. But the idea had entered quietly. Like a bookmark placed without announcement. Maybe family wasn't just about blood or years. Maybe it was about who stays emotionally present when things are unspectacular. I tested the connection unintentionally. On days when I was tired or distracted, I didn't perform. I didn't bring energy. I showed up as I was. They didn't disappear. They didn't demand improvement. That consistency deepened the bond more than any deep conversation could. From a language learning perspective, something else happened. My English around this person improved without effort. Not because I studied harder, but because anxiety decreased. When the brain feels safe, it processes language more efficiently. Fewer mistakes don't come from more rules, they come from less fear. If you're practicing English with this story, notice how simple the interactions are. Are you okay? Take your time. I'm listening. These sentences are easy. But their impact is enormous. Try saying them out loud. Slowly. Feel how much space they create. This person didn't become my entire world. That's important. Chosen family isn't about replacement. It's about addition. About finding emotional allies along the way. They were the first proof that my life in America didn't have to be emotionally solitary. Looking back, this was the moment the title of this story started becoming real. I hadn't found a family yet. But I had found the possibility of one. And possibility changes how you walk through the world. You stop bracing for loneliness. You start noticing people. So here's the quiet truth of this chapter. The first person who stays doesn't announce themselves as important. You only realize it later, when you look back and notice they were there all along. And once you've experienced that kind of staying, you never look at family the same way again. Learning through daily life. Nobody tells you this, but the most effective English lessons don't happen in classrooms or apps. They happen while you're tired, distracted, and slightly unsure of yourself, standing in line, sharing a meal. or explaining something simple that suddenly feels complicated. That's when language stops being theory and starts becoming part of your nervous system. After meeting the first person who stayed, something in my daily life shifted. Not dramatically. Nothing inspirational enough for a highlight reel. But ordinary moments started feeling safer. And safety, it turns out, is a powerful teacher. Our conversations were still simple. Sometimes painfully simple. How was your day? Busy. Same. But something changed in the way those words were exchanged. I wasn't rushing to sound smart anymore. I wasn't editing myself in advance. I spoke slower. I paused when I needed to. And no one looked uncomfortable when I did. That's when I realized something important. Fluency doesn't grow from speed. It grows from permission. There's a well-known concept in linguistics called comprehensible input. You learn best when language is slightly above your level, but not stressful. What people don't emphasize enough is the emotional side of this. Stress blocks input. Anxiety short-circuits memory. When you feel judged, your brain focuses on survival, not learning. When you feel accepted, your brain opens its hands. Daily life became my classroom. At the grocery store, I practiced small interactions without pressure. At work, I stopped preparing sentences too far in advance. With this person, and slowly, with others, I allowed mistakes to exist. And interestingly, the fewer mistakes I tried to avoid, the fewer I actually made. There was humor in this phase too. Once, while trying to describe a long, exhausting day, I said, "My brain is tired, but my body didn't get the memo." It wasn't perfect English. But it was mine. They laughed, not politely, but genuinely. That laughter stayed with me longer than any grammar correction ever had. Neuroscience explains why this works. Emotional engagement increases dopamine, which strengthens learning pathways. When you associate language with warmth, connection, or humor, your brain marks it as important. You remember more without trying harder. That's why stories, especially personal ones, are such powerful tools for learning English at B1 to C2 levels. I also noticed my listening skills improving naturally. Not because I caught every word, but because I stopped panicking when I didn't. I learned to listen for meaning instead of perfection. Tone. Intention. Body language. Those skills matter more than vocabulary lists in real conversations. Sometimes, I'd misunderstand something completely. We'd both realize it a few minutes later and laugh. Those moments used to embarrass me. Now they felt bonding. Shared confusion is surprisingly intimate. It tells both people, we're figuring this out together. At home, I reflected on how different this felt from my earlier attempts to improve faster. Back then, I treated English like a problem to solve. Now, it felt like a relationship, something you build by showing up consistently, even when you're tired or awkward. I also became more aware of how culture shaped communication. Americans often value clarity and positivity. Directness, but with emotional boundaries. Once I stopped judging that difference, I learned to work with it. I didn't need to overshare to connect. I just needed to be present. My sentences stayed simple. That was hard today. I'm still learning. Thanks for waiting. These are not advanced structures, but they're emotionally advanced. They invite patience. They signal honesty. And people respond to that. If you're practicing English with this story, try this exercise. Describe one normal day using very simple sentences. No fancy words. Just truth. I woke up tired. Work felt long. Talking helped. Say it slowly. Notice how your body feels. Language isn't just sound, it's sensation. Over time, something unexpected happened. My confidence grew quietly. Not the loud kind. The steady kind. The kind that doesn't disappear when you make a mistake. I started trusting that even if my English wasn't perfect, my meaning would land. And most of the time, it did. This phase of my life taught me something crucial about chosen family. Before people become emotionally close, they often share ordinary time. Not deep confessions. Not big promises. Just daily life. Repetition builds familiarity. Familiarity builds comfort. Comfort builds connection. I hadn't found my family yet. But I was building the skills needed to recognize them. Listening without fear. Speaking without performance. Letting silence breathe. These aren't just language skills. They're relational skills. And maybe that's the quiet lesson here. You don't learn English so you can belong. You learn English while learning how to belong. The two processes grow together, slowly, through daily life. That's how language stopped being my obstacle and started becoming my bridge. Love tested by America. Love, in a new country, behaves differently. It doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with questions. Small ones at first. Practical ones. Where will we live? How does this system work? Why is everything in online form? And slowly, deeper ones appear, usually late at night, when your English is tired and your emotions stop pretending to be polite. This part of my story isn't a romantic highlight. It's a stress test. When love entered my life in America, it didn't make things easier. It made everything more visible. Cultural differences that were invisible when I was alone suddenly mattered. How we argued. How we apologized. How we showed care. Back home, love was surrounded by family, context, shared assumptions. Here, love stood alone, under bright lights, with no instructions. At first, it felt exciting. Two people choosing each other in a foreign place. There was something brave about that. But bravery doesn't cancel misunderstanding. It just gives you the courage to face it. Language played a strange role. My English was good enough to discuss plans, but not always strong enough to explain feelings clearly. When emotions ran high, my sentences got shorter. Simpler. Sometimes too simple. I'm fine. It's okay. Forget it. Those phrases sound harmless, but they hide storms. In my native language, I could explain nuance. In English, I often chose silence. Science explains this well. Under emotional stress, the brain defaults to its strongest language, usually your first one. When you can't access that language, frustration increases. You don't just argue about the topic. You argue about not being understood. That happened to us more than once. There were moments when I wondered if love was supposed to feel this hard. Movies never show this version. They skip the scenes where you misunderstand tone, misread intention, or argue about something small because something big feels unsafe to name. In America, independence is valued. Emotional self-reliance is admired. But love requires interdependence. Negotiating that difference was exhausting. There was humor too, looking back. Once, during an argument, I searched desperately for the right English word to explain how overwhelmed I felt. I couldn't find it. I finally said, "My feelings are crowded." It wasn't perfect. It wasn't textbook. But it was honest. We paused. Then laughed. That laugh didn't solve the problem, but it softened the room. Sometimes, that's enough to keep going. We learned slowly. Painfully slowly. We learned that silence doesn't always mean distance, sometimes it means translation is happening internally. We learned that repeating yourself isn't failure, it's care. We learned that love in a second language requires patience on a level grammar never taught us. I started practicing emotional English more intentionally. Not during arguments, that's too late, but during calm moments. When this happens, I feel, I need time to think. I'm not angry, just tired. These sentences are simple. B1 level. But they prevent C2 level damage. Psychologists call this preemptive emotional labeling. You name feelings early to prevent escalation. It works across languages. America tested our love through logistics too. Work schedules. Financial pressure. Immigration stress. Policies that don't care about your emotions. You learn quickly that systems don't bend for love. People must bend instead. And bending too much, too often, can hurt. There were moments when giving up felt easier than explaining myself one more time. But something kept us trying. Not passion. Not drama. Commitment to understanding, even when it was uncomfortable. That commitment is quiet. It doesn't look impressive online. But it builds something solid underneath. Through these challenges, I noticed something important about myself. I was no longer completely alone in my struggles. Even when love felt strained, there was presence. Someone to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. That mattered. Even imperfect connection is healthier than perfect isolation. For English learners listening to this, notice how love doesn't require advanced vocabulary. It requires clarity and honesty. Practice these sentences out loud. I don't know how to say this well. Please be patient with me. I care even when I'm quiet. These sentences save relationships more often than beautiful words ever will. Gradually, love stopped feeling like something America was testing, and started feeling like something America was revealing. It revealed my communication habits, my fears, my tendency to withdraw when overwhelmed. Love didn't break because of the pressure. It showed us where we needed to grow. This chapter is important to the idea of chosen family. Love alone doesn't automatically become family. It becomes family through endurance. Through staying when it's easier to leave. Through choosing understanding over winning. Blood doesn't guarantee that. Choice does. We didn't know it yet, but this difficult season was laying the foundation for something deeper. Not just partnership, but shared resilience. The kind that eventually extends beyond two people. So if love feels hard where you are right now, especially in another language, another culture, don't assume it's failing. It might just be learning how to speak. And sometimes, that's the most honest form of love there is. Family without blood. There's a moment in adulthood when you realize something quietly radical. Family is not always who you came from. Sometimes, family is who you arrive at. This realization doesn't come with music or certainty. It sneaks up on you during ordinary days, when you notice that some people know your tired face better than your happy one, and still stay. In America, I learned this slowly. At first, the word family felt heavy. Final. Reserved for people connected by blood, history, shared childhood memories I couldn't recreate here. Everyone else felt temporary. Friendly, but temporary. Useful, but not essential. I didn't question that assumption, I carried it with me like an invisible rulebook. Then daily life started challenging it. It began with small, repeated moments. Shared meals that weren't special occasions. Conversations that didn't need explanations. Someone texting, "Did you eat?" without needing a reason. These gestures didn't look impressive. They didn't match the dramatic definition of family I grew up with. But they were consistent. And consistency changes how the brain categorizes people. Neuroscience tells us that attachment forms through repeated safety, not intensity. Your nervous system doesn't ask, "Who loves me the most?" It asks, "Who is predictable when I'm vulnerable?" Slowly, without realizing it, my nervous system began answering that question differently. These people weren't perfect. Neither was I. But something mattered more than perfection, emotional availability. When I was tired, I didn't have to perform. When my English broke down, no one rushed me. When I didn't feel like explaining myself, silence was allowed. That kind of permission changes you. There was humor in redefining family, too. I remember laughing at myself one evening, realizing I trusted these people with my bad moods more than I trusted some relatives back home. Not because my relatives didn't care, but because distance had changed the relationship. Time zones don't just affect schedules. They affect emotional timing. In America, independence is admired. You're supposed to handle things yourself. Ask for help only when necessary. But chosen family disrupts that rule gently. It says, "You don't have to be impressive here." That was new for me. uncomfortable, even. I had built an identity around being capable. Letting others support me felt like failing, until it didn't. Language played a surprising role again. With chosen family, my English became simpler, not more advanced. Short sentences. Honest reactions. That hurt. I'm confused. Can you explain? These are not elegant phrases. But they are connective. They invite response instead of admiration. Psychologists talk about secure attachment behaviors. Asking for clarification. Expressing needs directly. Tolerating disagreement without fear of abandonment. I didn't learn these behaviors from books. I learned them by watching how chosen family responded when things were imperfect. They didn't disappear. They didn't overreact. They stayed. I noticed something else too. I laughed more. Not polite laughter, real laughter. The kind that surprises you because you didn't plan it. Laughter is a strong indicator of safety. You don't laugh freely when you're guarding yourself. Humor became shared language, even when vocabulary failed. There were moments when I questioned myself. Was I replacing my family? Was this disloyal? But the truth is, chosen family doesn't erase where you come from. It expands where you belong. Love isn't a limited resource. It grows when shared. From a cultural perspective, this was a big shift. Back home, family is obligation first, choice second. In America, relationships are often choice first, obligation later. Neither system is perfect. But living between them taught me something valuable. Obligation without choice can feel heavy, and choice without commitment can feel empty. Chosen family lives in the balance between the two. If you're listening to this for real English story practice, notice how these ideas are expressed with simple language. They stayed. I felt safe. I didn't have to explain. Try repeating those sentences. Feel how much meaning they carry without complexity. This is real English, not impressive, but effective. At this stage of my journey, I stopped feeling like I was missing something essential. I stopped measuring my life against an old definition of family. Instead, I started noticing who showed up when nothing exciting was happening. Who listened when I repeated myself? Who remembered details without being asked? That's when the title of this story truly made sense to me. I hadn't lost family. I had found another form of it. Chosen family doesn't arrive all at once. It builds quietly, through shared time, shared mistakes, shared ordinary days. You don't announce it. One day, you simply realize that if everything fell apart, these are the people you'd call first. Not because you have to, but because you want to. And that realization is powerful. It grounds you. It tells you that even far from home, even in another language, even after many mistakes, you are not floating alone. You are anchored, not by blood, but by choice. English became softer. There's a moment when a language stops sounding like a test and starts sounding like a voice. Not a perfect one. Not a confident one. Just yours. I didn't notice the change at first. That's how real changes happen, quietly, while you're busy living. My English didn't suddenly improve after I found chosen family. It softened. Before, every sentence felt like it had to stand up straight. Good posture. Correct grammar. No mistakes. My words were tense, like they were waiting to be judged. I spoke carefully, as if English were a glass object I might break. That tension didn't help fluency. It blocked it. Around the people who stayed, something relaxed. I spoke slower without apologizing. I searched for words out loud. I corrected myself mid-sentence and kept going. No one interrupted. No one looked impatient. That permission changed everything. There's solid science behind this. When the brain feels safe, the amygdala, the part responsible for threat detection, quiets down. Cognitive resources free up. Memory retrieval improves. In simple terms, you speak better when you're not afraid. Not because you know more, but because your brain stops panicking. I started noticing small things. My tone changed. My voice lowered. I used fewer filler phrases like sorry and maybe. I didn't rush to finish sentences. Sometimes, I paused and let the pause exist. That used to scare me. Now it felt natural. English became less about performance and more about presence. Humor changed too. Before, I avoided jokes. Humor felt dangerous. One wrong word and the moment collapses. Now, humor showed up accidentally. Not clever jokes, observations. Self-awareness. Small exaggerations. I'd describe my day and add, my brain gave up at 3 p.m. People laughed. I laughed. Not because the sentence was funny, but because it was honest. Listening improved in a similar way. I stopped trying to understand every word. I listened for direction, emotion, intention. If I missed something, I asked, "Can you repeat that? What do you mean?" Those questions used to embarrass me. Now they felt normal. Healthy, even. Asking questions is a sign of engagement, not weakness. I realized something important. Chosen family didn't teach me English. They gave me a place where English could grow naturally. Like soil. Language doesn't grow in pressure. It grows in patience. At work, this change followed me. I spoke more clearly. Not louder, clearer. I expressed limits. I need more time. I'm not sure yet. Those are simple sentences, but they signal confidence. Colleagues responded differently. Conversations felt more balanced. I wasn't just responding anymore. I was participating. I also noticed fewer misunderstandings. Not because my grammar improved dramatically, but because I clarified earlier. When something felt confusing, I named it. That habit saves energy. It prevents resentment. It builds trust. These are communication skills that go beyond language. They're human skills. If you're practicing English with this story, here's something useful. Practice soft sentences. Not advanced ones. Soft ones. I'm still thinking. That doesn't feel right yet. Can we talk later? These sentences don't demand attention. They invite cooperation. In real life, that's powerful. There was an emotional shift too. I stopped measuring my English against native speakers. Comparison disappeared quietly. I wasn't trying to sound American anymore. I was trying to sound understood. That's a different goal. A healthier one. Accent stopped bothering me as much. It didn't disappear, it just stopped feeling like a flaw. An accent is evidence of effort. Of movement. Of a life lived in more than one place. Chosen family treated it that way. No corrections unless I asked. No jokes unless shared. Respect does that. One evening, during a casual conversation, I realized I was explaining something emotional without planning it first. No script. No mental rehearsal. The words came imperfectly, but they came. And they landed. That moment stayed with me. It was proof that English had become a bridge, not a barrier. I also became more patient with others learning. When someone struggled to express themselves, I waited. I listened differently. I recognized the pause, because I knew it well. That awareness deepened my empathy. Language learning had quietly reshaped my character. This chapter matters to the idea of family without blood. Because language is how we show care. How we resolve conflict. How we stay. When English became softer, my relationships deepened. Not louder. Not more dramatic. Deeper. I learned that you don't need perfect English to belong. You need consistent presence. You need the courage to speak simply and honestly. You need people who don't rush you toward fluency, but walk with you through it. Looking back, this was a turning point. Not visible from the outside. But internally, everything felt different. I wasn't translating myself as much. I was expressing myself. Slowly. Carefully. Truthfully. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of chosen family. They don't change your language directly. They change the environment, and your language follows. English didn't become stronger. It became kinder. And in that kindness, it finally felt like it belonged to me. Building a life together. Building a life sounds like a big, dramatic project. It isn't. It's mostly small decisions made repeatedly while you're tired. Where to live. What to cook. Whether to talk now or later. Whether to explain yourself again, more slowly, or let the moment pass. Over time, these choices stack up and quietly become a life. By the time I reached this chapter, I wasn't chasing belonging anymore. I was participating in it. Life in America started to feel less like a test and more like a routine I recognized. Not exciting every day. Not easy. Just familiar enough to stop hurting. The people around me, my partner, my chosen family, didn't fix my problems. They helped me carry them without making me feel small for having them. We built rhythms. Shared mornings. Evenings that didn't require updates. The kind of closeness where silence doesn't ask questions. That's when you know something has settled. Your nervous system stops scanning the room. Your shoulders drop without permission. There's science behind this, too. Long-term connection creates predictability. Predictability reduces stress hormones. Your brain starts allocating energy elsewhere: creativity, humor, patience. I noticed I laughed more easily. Not because life was easier, but because it felt less threatening. English continued to evolve quietly. Not in leaps. In layers. I learned the language of planning. Let's do this next week. We'll figure it out. I learned the language of compromise. That works for me. I can adjust. These phrases don't sound poetic, but they build real lives. They are the scaffolding of shared existence. Money conversations were part of it, too. Not glamorous. Necessary. Talking about budgets, priorities, trade-offs, all in a second language, forces clarity. You can't hide behind vague words. You learn to be direct without being harsh. That balance took time. And practice. And patience from people who didn't treat my pauses as incompetence. Humor helped again. When things felt heavy, someone would say something gently ridiculous. Or I would. Once, after a long discussion about responsibilities, I sighed and said, "Adulting is very loud today." Everyone laughed. The tension eased. Laughter doesn't solve problems, but it creates room to keep working on them. We also built traditions, small ones. Weekly meals. Messages on important days. Celebrations that mixed cultures without overthinking it. You don't need matching histories to create shared memories. You just need consistency. That's something chosen family understands intuitively. I noticed another shift. I stopped narrating my life to people back home as much. Not because I loved them less, but because I was finally living where I was. Presence replaced explanation. That's a sign of settling, when you no longer need to justify your choices to feel okay with them. At work, my confidence followed me home and came back stronger. I set boundaries more clearly. I asked for what I needed without apologizing excessively. I'll need clarification. That timeline is tight. Simple sentences. Clear intentions. People responded well. Clarity builds trust faster than perfection. If you're practicing English with this story, notice how many useful phrases are about coordination, not emotion. What do you think? Should we try this? Let's revisit later. These sentences build lives. Practice them. Say them out loud. They're not advanced, they're essential. There were setbacks, of course. Days when old loneliness visited unexpectedly. Moments when cultural differences resurfaced. Stress that made everything feel heavier than it needed to be. But now, those moments didn't isolate me. They were shared. That changed their weight. Chosen family doesn't remove hardship. It redistributes it. I learned something important here. Independence doesn't disappear when you build a life together. It matures. You're still responsible for yourself, but you're no longer alone with yourself. That distinction matters. Over time, the question, "Do I belong here?" stopped appearing. Not because I answered it convincingly, but because it lost relevance. Belonging wasn't a destination anymore. It was an ongoing process, maintained through care, communication, and showing up even when it's inconvenient. Language mirrored this shift. My English didn't feel like a tool anymore. It felt like part of my identity. Not replacing my first language. Coexisting with it. Like a second home you know well enough to navigate in the dark. One evening, during a normal conversation about plans, I realized something quietly powerful. I wasn't translating in my head. I was thinking, feeling, responding, all in English, without effort. Not because I had mastered it, but because it had become integrated into my life. That moment didn't deserve applause. It deserved gratitude. Building a life together taught me that family without blood isn't fragile. It's intentional. It's built through reliability, not obligation. Through choice, not expectation. Through patience with language, with mistakes, with moods. And here's the honest truth. You don't build this kind of life by trying to impress people. You build it by letting them see you when you're ordinary. If you're listening to this and practicing English, remember this: fluency grows where life happens. Not in isolation. Not in pressure. In shared spaces, shared problems, shared quiet. This chapter wasn't the end of my journey. But it was the moment I realized I wasn't preparing for a life anymore. I was already living one, together. When love is tested, not announced. People talk about love like it's something you declare once and then protect forever. Real love doesn't work like that. Real love shows up quietly, usually after disappointment, and asks a simple question: are we still willing to try today? Marriage, especially in a second language and a second culture, doesn't test your romance. It tests your communication. And communication is where everything either deepens or breaks. By this stage of my life in the United States, love wasn't dramatic anymore. It was practical. Coordinated. Occasionally exhausted. We loved each other, yes. But more importantly, we learned how to stay present when love felt inconvenient. There were days when English failed me emotionally. I knew what I felt, but the words arrived late. Or wrong. Or too soft. Or too sharp. Arguments in a second language are strange. You feel deeply, but you express selectively. You edit while hurting. That slows conflict, but it also risks misunderstanding. Early on, I thought I needed better English to be a better partner. That wasn't true. I needed better listening. I needed patience, with myself and with the space between words. We developed a habit that saved us, pausing on purpose. When conversations heated up, someone would say, "Let's slow down." Not stop. Just slow. That phrase became a bridge. It wasn't about winning. It was about understanding before reacting. Chosen family played an unexpected role here. They didn't take sides. They didn't dramatize. They normalized struggle. Hearing others say, "Yeah, we went through that too," removes shame. Shame isolates. Normalization connects. Sometimes humor did the work words couldn't. Once, in the middle of a tense moment, I said, "My English has left the room, but my feelings are still here." We laughed. Not because the problem disappeared, but because the pressure did. Laughter reset the room. There's a quiet skill in long-term relationships, learning when to explain and when to simply be there. Not everything needs a sentence. Sometimes presence is enough. A glass of water. Sitting nearby. Staying. English continued evolving through these moments. I learned emotional phrases that weren't dramatic but were effective. I didn't mean it that way. I'm overwhelmed, not angry. Can we talk later when I'm clearer? These sentences saved energy. They prevented escalation. They kept us on the same side. If you're practicing English through this story, notice how emotional clarity doesn't require advanced vocabulary. It requires honesty and timing. Practice naming states, not stories. I'm tired. I'm confused. I need reassurance. These phrases build intimacy. Marriage also taught me about compromise without self-erasure. In another culture, it's easy to shrink yourself to avoid friction. I did that at first. I stayed quiet. I adapted constantly. Over time, I realized that disappearing doesn't create harmony, it creates distance. Chosen family reflected that back to me. They noticed when I went quiet. They asked gentle questions. They didn't demand answers. That kind of attention reminded me that my voice mattered, even when it shook. Work stress, immigration stress, financial stress, they all tested us. None of them were romantic. But surviving them together built something stronger than romance. Reliability. Trust. The knowledge that problems could arrive, and we would still face them side by side. I also learned forgiveness differently. Not as a big event, but as a daily adjustment. Letting go of small resentments before they hardened. Saying it's okay and meaning it. Or saying it's not okay yet and staying anyway. Language softened again here. I stopped searching for perfect apologies. I chose sincere ones. I'm sorry. I see it now. Simple. Direct. Effective. There was a moment when I realized something profound. Our relationship no longer depended on how well I spoke English. It depended on how consistently I showed up. Language supported love, it didn't define it. Chosen family reinforced this truth. They modeled long-term commitment without drama. They stayed through boredom, frustration, change. That example mattered more than advice. I stopped romanticizing struggle. I stopped fearing it too. Challenges weren't signs of failure. They were invitations to practice patience, with language, with emotions, with each other. One evening, after resolving a small disagreement, we sat quietly. No big closure speech. just calm. And I thought, this is it. Not excitement. Not intensity. Stability. Mutual respect. Peace earned slowly. That's when I understood what family without blood really means. It's not about replacing anyone. It's about choosing to remain connected when walking away would be easier. Marriage didn't make my life perfect. Chosen family didn't either. But together, they made life possible, in a language that once terrified me, in a place that once felt temporary. If you're listening to this to practice English, remember, language grows strongest in emotionally safe spaces. Build those spaces first. Fluency will follow. This chapter wasn't about love stories. It was about love skills. And those skills, viz. Patience, clarity, humility, last longer than passion ever could. Family without blood doesn't shout. It stays. And sometimes, staying is the most fluent sentence you'll ever speak. Who is your chosen family? Imagine standing in a quiet room after everyone has gone home. The lights are dim. The noise is gone. And for the first time in a long while, you don't feel the urge to leave. That feeling, calm without loneliness, is how I knew the journey had changed me. When I first came to the United States, I thought family was something you were born into, something fixed, permanent, non-negotiable. If you didn't have it nearby, you simply learned to survive without it. That belief shaped how I worked, how I loved, how I protected myself. I stayed independent, efficient, emotionally minimal. But life here slowly corrected me, not through lectures, but through people. Chosen family didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in fragments. A coworker who noticed when I stopped joking. A neighbor who remembered my schedule better than I did. Friends who invited me to holidays without asking why I didn't go home. They never announced themselves as family. They behaved like it. That's the thing about chosen family. They don't demand loyalty. They earn trust. There's a quiet psychological shift that happens when you feel supported without obligation. Your nervous system relaxes. Your language slows. Your need to perform disappears. That's when English changed again for me, not in grammar, but in tone. I stopped rehearsing sentences in my head. I spoke imperfectly and stayed anyway. I asked questions without apologizing for my accent. I laughed mid-sentence when words failed. Language became a bridge, not a test. If you're listening to this to practice English, notice how safety affects fluency. Research shows that stress reduces language processing. Comfort increases retention. That's why practicing through story works, especially stories where people survive emotionally, not just linguistically. My marriage grew differently once chosen family surrounded us. We weren't each other's only support system anymore. Pressure softened. Expectations became realistic. Love had room to breathe. We didn't need to be everything for each other, and that made us stronger together. There was a moment, not dramatic, just honest, when someone asked me, "Do you miss home?" I paused. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the answer had changed. I miss people, I said. Not places. That surprised me. Home had quietly transformed from a location into a feeling. A group of people who knew my story and didn't rush me through it. People who accepted that my English carried emotion differently. That my silence wasn't distance. That my humor sometimes arrived late. Chosen family taught me a powerful lesson. Belonging isn't about similarity. It's about consistency. They didn't share my past. They shared my present. And over time, that mattered more. There's a cultural myth, especially strong in immigrant stories, that strength means doing everything alone. I believed that myth for years. It made me productive, but it also made me tired. Truly tired. Letting people in felt risky. Staying open felt inefficient. But connection isn't efficient. It's human. Slowly, I allowed myself to need others without shame. To receive help without debt. To trust without contracts. And something unexpected happened. I became more myself. My humor returned. My curiosity deepened. My English softened into something warmer. I wasn't translating anymore. I was responding. That's the heart of real English practice, responding, not reciting. If you're at a stage where you feel invisible, or temporary, or emotionally untranslated, hear this, it doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're between chapters. Chosen family often finds you when you stop trying to impress and start allowing yourself to be seen. They hear your unfinished sentences. They stay through your quiet days. They don't correct your grammar when your meaning is clear. And one day, you realize you've stopped counting how long you'll stay. You're already there. So let me ask you, not as a lesson, but as an invitation. Who is your chosen family? The people who show up without being asked. The ones who feel familiar even if you've known them briefly. The ones who sit with you when words don't work. Family without blood doesn't replace where you come from. It adds to who you become. And maybe that's the real gift of living, loving, and learning a language in another country. You don't just learn how to speak differently. You learn how to belong differently. That's what this story was really about. Not English. Not America. Not even marriage. But connection built slowly, imperfectly, and chosen every day. Before you leave this video, pause for a second. Ask yourself one quiet question. Who stayed with you when life stopped making sense? Not who shares your last name. Not who knows your past. But who chose you, again and again, even when you were tired, broken, or still learning how to speak your truth. This story wasn't just about learning English. It wasn't just about America. It was about finding a place where your imperfect words were enough. And where belonging didn't require blood, fluency, or perfection. If this story felt familiar, it's because you're not alone, even if it feels that way right now. And if you want to keep practicing real English through real-life stories. Stories about love, marriage, culture shock, healing, and chosen family. Then this channel is for you. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Like this video if it touched something personal. Comment below, who is your chosen family? Because sometimes, the family that changes your life is the one you haven't met yet. And the story you're living right now might be exactly what someone else needs to hear next. See you in the next video.